Cam dampener activated.
Sound familiar? You know, I'm all for having voice cues in cockpits and such so that you know when bad things are happening, but hearing SHODAN's voice in your PBA is probably going to give you nightmares sooner or later.
Drone launched.
Today in Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Terra Strike Force Centauri. One of those games you just have to sit back and wonder, how did this not become popular? I mean, System Shock's lack of popularity when it was released could have been blamed on a number of factors, like having complicated controls, or not being as immersive without its CD enhanced features, not being as action heavy as some gamers would have liked, or maybe just because of its rather steep system requirements for the time. Terra doesn't have many of those problems. Mind you, the controls do take a little getting used to, and the system requirements were still pretty steep, but this is an action-heavy, mission-based game that's easy to play and very intense. So, where did it all go wrong? Damned if I know. The game actually did sell better than System Shock, but unfortunately, sales of the game never recouped the cost of making it, so all the sequels that had been planned never materialized. Basically, it was a critical success, but a commercial failure. Still, now that I've finally had a chance to play through all 38 missions of this game, I think a sequel would have been awesome, and I really hope whoever currently owns the license finds a way to make it happen. As for this DOS version itself, there's a lot to say, so let's get to it. Terra Strike Force Centauri was created and released by Looking Glass Studios in 1996, though curiously there doesn't seem to have been an actual publisher for the game. Instead, two distributors are noted, with Virgin Interactive being responsible for distributing boxed copies, while Media Safari handled the OEM and jewel case versions. It's a one-player 3D action simulation game supporting 256-color SVGA graphics and various popular sound devices. I should note that while the game requires SVGA graphics for the main interface between missions, the gameplay itself uses VGA graphics, either running 320 by 200 or 320 by 400 resolution. As for its current release date, it's still commercial but fairly easy to find on places like Amazon and eBay, though the range of prices can be pretty dramatic and the number of copies available at any one time fluctuates wildly. In any case, if you just want a used copy in its original jewel case, you'll probably spend around $6 to $10, but if you want it fully boxed and everything, expect to pay closer to $30. Now, some people try to sell fully boxed copies for $60 to $70, and really, that's just insane, considering the game's not even remotely rare. Do be careful which version you pick up though, because some of the jewel case versions are incomplete OEM copies that were distributed with new computers and only contain the first 8 missions of the game. There's also 2 different demo versions floating around the net that you can download and play if you want to try the game for yourself ahead of time.
If it cannot protect us, this council should disband.
Varric, take your seat.
Pirates steal another shipment of Petros grenades and you do nothing? Those grenades could wipe out a city. Take your seat, sir.
The story for this game is somewhat difficult to understand, as it just drops you into the game world and expects you to follow its rules. And normally this works to the advantage of immersion, but in this case the game gives you very little backstory on the universe itself, and instead focuses more on character development. However, the lack of backstory could simply be because there really isn't all that much of it. Essentially what it boils down to is that at some point in the past, humanity had colonized various other worlds in our solar system, but then a new world government was formed on Earth called the Hegemony, and they sought to annex all of these off-world colonies. Those on the moons of Jupiter, though, were none too happy about the situation, and rather than start a conflict, they were allowed to leave for the Alpha Centauri system to set up a new home there, rather than being annexed by the Hegemony. Life in the Alpha Centauri system wasn't without strife though, so each of the clans that had formed set up their own strike forces to help cut into all the bandits and pirates trying to raid the system. This eventually leads to the creation of a new strike force, Strike Force Centauri, with each of its personnel handpicked as the best of the best to be able to respond to threats all throughout Centauri space. You play the role of the team's leader, Nicola App Io, going through a story that's mostly told through highly overacted live-action cutscenes, fighting pirates at first, but fighting Hegemony as well not too long into the story. While the game is primarily played from a 3D perspective, before each mission you're able to point and click your way around the SFC base, though you only have a couple places you can go really. In your quarters, you can save and load your game, look at your medals, or access your computer terminal, which is used to read emails and news articles, as well as look up information on various aspects of the game's universe and technology. Outside in the main corridor, you can look up the kill board just to keep tabs on all the running totals, and you can head to your mission briefing so you know what you're going to be up to next. After your briefing is concluded, you have the ability to outfit your powered battle armor, also known as the PBA, as well as select squad mates and assign their equipment as well. Once you're satisfied with all your selections, that's when the action begins. The gameplay itself is unlike anything else. Your suit lets you move effortlessly in any direction, but instead of using the mouse to look around, you use the mouse to click on things, such as buttons in the suit's interface, or on targets in your view to lock onto them. You also aim using the mouse, thus you don't look and fire in the same direction, as it would be with most first-person shooters. In fact, the controls are almost identical to those found in System Shock, so if you could play that game fine, this one's not much different, just a lot faster paced. To that end, you don't have to be 100% accurate with your attacks, as your suit will automatically lead targets and aim appropriately so long as your mouse cursor is close to where you want to shoot, even if the weapon involved is launched into the air first, like grenades. Also, unlike most first-person shooters, you have a variety of mission objectives to accomplish. Now, sometimes missions are pretty straightforward and just need you to destroy everything, but some missions can get very creative. For instance, there's one mission where you have to defend the entrance to a mine from being blasted open, but at the same time, the enemies are bringing in a massive piece of artillery to obliterate the entry in a single shot. If you can take out the guards for the artillery without destroying the artillery itself, you can capture it and win some extra points towards getting medals. A small handful of the missions also require stealth, meaning you need to use various tactics to stay out of the sensor ranges of your enemies and complete your objectives as cautiously as possible. Most missions also have you commanding one or more squad mates. Now, there's actually quite the range of orders you can issue to them, including movement orders, engagement orders, and even tactics, so that you can have your squad mates attack aggressively, defensively, stay in formation with yourself, etc. And some missions will even have special orders you can issue, such as having an electronics expert reboot a disabled PBA, or having a demolitions expert load some explosives onto a building to detonate from a distance. For the most part, the AI is actually pretty intelligent, though it does glitch out on rare occasions, and the AI is unfortunately not very smart with the usage of explosive weapons, in that it only checks its own range when launching explosive devices, and fails to check if any allies will be caught in the blast. Early on, this isn't too big a deal, but later in the game, when you start getting some really powerful explosive weapons, it's not unheard of to see your allies damage themselves, or even you. One thing I really enjoy about this game is that it throws a number of curves at you, allowing the interface and the overall feel of the game to change in accordance with how the story is playing out. For instance, the first time you get an aborted mission in line with the story as opposed to a failed mission, it's going to be a bit of a surprise. Rest assured, when a mission is intentionally aborted by the game, it's not your fault, it's supposed to happen. There's even a single mission later on where you get to travel around in a pirate PBA. Seriously, I had no idea this was even going to happen, and when I heard the CEO telling me I was going to be commanding one of these during the briefing, I thought it was the most awesome thing this game could possibly do, and the mission itself just had this tension about it that couldn't be matched. Add in some awesome situationally dependent music and the ability to render reflective water in distant terrain a decade before hardware acceleration could pull this off, and this easily becomes one of the most immersive games ever made, despite the rendering engine being a bit pixely. One last thing to mention before moving on though is that the game comes with a special feature called the Random Scenario Builder, which basically helps to extend the gameplay a little by allowing you to set up your own custom missions of sorts. To be perfectly honest though, it's not really all that fun to play with and feels like a rushed extra. And it could have been made so much better if it could actually create mission objectives intelligently based on the maps you selected, or if it could create completely random missions, since despite its name, it has very little randomness about it. You have to explicitly select what enemies you'll face along with how many of them and where, so it doesn't really take long for this extra feature to become somewhat boring. Still, it's an interesting addition.
Placing the charges on blue fuse.
I'm not going to go into many specifics regarding the different equipment you can get, simply because there's a ton of it, but I am going to go into some of the intricacies of your PBA, to give you an idea of how this action-heavy game with battles that rarely last more than 20 to 30 seconds also ends up being a simulation at the same time. Two of the most important indicators in the entire interface are your armor levels and your health levels. Your armor is shown as that strange multi-lined square thing in the middle of your visor, while the red bar in the top left is your health level. Armor protects your suit and yourself from damage and regenerates over time, provided the ability to regenerate it isn't damaged by special weapons like the railgun. Your health level is basically exactly as it sounds. If the red bar depletes completely, you're killed, plain and simple. Until that bar is depleted, you can still function, but your suit itself may end up with damage to its various systems, which can cause things to glitch up in various ways. For instance, damage to your targeting disc will occasionally cause your weapons to not fire where you want them to. Damage to your sensors can cause things to flicker in and out, while damage to your power plant will reduce the rate at which energy and armor can recharge. You also have some view control buttons up in the top left, with the ability to zoom your visor in to see things that are far away, and the ability to engage infrared sensors to help see things that are generating heat signatures. The upper right area shows a green bar representing your suit's presently stored energy levels, and a small red bar next to it indicating how much jump jet fuel is left. And your jump jets allow you to make extremely high jumps by holding the spacebar down, or you can just make quick hops by tapping the spacebar. And it's important to note that unlike some games with jump jets or jetpacks in general, you don't take fall damage in this game, so feel free to hit the ground as hard as you want to. Another important suit function is the ability to launch drones. And these drones have sensors and visual monitors and can be used to scout an area out without actually entering it. Mind you, it will alert enemies to your presence, so it's not a good idea to use these when stealth is important. That said, you can control the drone automatically by telling it where to go on your map, or you can control it manually by holding the control key down while pressing your movement keys. Lastly, every suit typically has an auxiliary suit function installed, or ASF. At the start of the game, the ASF of choice is usually the Dynamo, as it has no activation functions and doubles your energy recharge rate for the entire mission, making it easier to deal damage to the enemies. Other ASFs include auto turrets you can deploy to automatically attack nearby targets, universal backups to help restore damaged suit functions, and personal shields which enhance your suit's defensive capabilities, just to name a few of them.
Sight looks alright, enemy sighted. Engaging.
I have a number of tips for those of you who've never played this game before and are thinking of giving it a go. And my first major tip is to always equip yourself and your squad mates with lasers. Yeah, I know, lasers are weak and they have limited range. The thing is, they're the best weapon to use against drones, and you end up fighting a lot of drones in later missions. Plus the fact that they have the best energy to damage ratio, so when you're in a really intense firefight against numerous enemies, you're simply not going to have enough energy to do effective damage with any energy weapons except for the laser. Which isn't to say the other energy weapons suck, but it really helps to have the laser to fall back on when energy levels dry up. My next tip is to keep in mind that enemies tend to only attack allies which fire at them first. To that end, you may want to be cautious about how you tell your allies to engage the enemies, depending on how badly hurt they are or if they have objectives that they need to accomplish. Now, there's a couple missions, including the very last one, where it's important to get key people involved in your mission to do their special tasks as soon as possible. Otherwise, they may become a prime target in a firefight when they start attacking the enemies, or you yourself may not be able to get to an important spot ahead of time. Not to mention, there's a couple missions where you absolutely must split up your team if you intend to win. Another useful tip is to just hold down your jump jet button if you find yourself surrounded. The sudden burst of speed, coupled with the extreme increase in altitude, will throw off the enemies firing at you, giving your squad mates time to home in and clear out the enemies that are bothering you while you sit safely in the air for a moment. Some missions also have a lot of areas you can explore if you want to rack up some extra kills for the kill board, as you might find pirate outposts or other such things. It's not necessary to do any of that, but you can get some extra points for your final tallies and towards the medals you can earn. It's also extremely important to make effective use of your drone so you can get an idea of what you're getting yourself into before you get yourself into it. Plus, launching a drone in one direction while scouting another lets you cover two angles at once. The drones themselves can even be fitted with explosives later in the game, but I never really found much of a use for equipping them as such. My final tip is to never stop moving. The AI is specifically designed so that the faster a target is moving, the more trouble it has hitting it, even though your own weapons auto-lock and auto-lead. Now, this makes the Scout PBA surprisingly agile versus enemy targets, even if it's not very well armored. And it also makes the heavy PBAs a less obvious choice for your missions later in, since their slower speed means you're more likely to take damage in them, even if they do have much thicker armor than the standard PBAs. In wide open areas or in missions where speed is essential, you'll probably want to go with Scout PBAs or standard PBAs, even if you can choose a heavy one.
Let's not stay here any longer than necessary.
Overall, Terra Nova's Strike Force Centauri is an awesome and intense action game. Balanced just right for the most part, with plenty of customization and a graphics engine that was way ahead of its time, even if really pixelated. Extra touches like being able to sustain visible damage in your helmet and seeing lightning happen a moment before you hear it, just like in real life, coupled with the live action cutscenes, just makes this one of the most immersive DOS games ever made, and worth trying at least once, even if this isn't your cup of tea. Just keep in mind the controls can take a bit of getting used to, and that the death animation when you get killed in a mission is surprisingly graphic compared to how not graphic the rest of the game is. As for setting it up in DOSBox, much to my surprise, the game runs very badly if you use the auto or max cycle settings, so you need to set a fixed cycles count, and in this regards, the higher you can go without slowing the game down, the better. I was using a setting of 120,000, but if you can go higher without any issues, then do so. 120,000 will probably be too high for some users, in which case you'll need to set a lower setting. Setting this lower will simply result in lower frame rates, but the game will still play at the correct speed, as long as you're not pushing DOSBox harder than your system can handle. Anywho, that's all for episode 115 of Ancient DOS Games. Next week's a filler, and there's something interesting that recently happened that I want to tell you guys about that's related to a DOS game I've covered in the past. In fact, I'm pretty sure some of you already know what it is, but in any case, stay tuned for next Saturday to see for yourself what's going on.
Ours.